For a little over the last 6 months, I've been working with Jeff Wulf, who has been creating a 3D printed baroque flute. This has been a really exciting project for me, going from a flute that functioned, but I didn't think anyone could actually use it for something, to an instrument that I think is pretty terrific. And I hope that this video will show you some of the abilities of this flute, which I think is considerable. The idea which Jeff has had for this flute is for it to be an inexpensive way to get started on the baroque flute. This is not intended to replace handmade professional quality instruments. Jeff is not presenting it that way, nor am I. On the other hand, it is a really excellent way to get a start and actually to get a feeling whether the baroque flute is something you want to get serious about and spend the money on a professional quality instrument. So the flute is 3D printed based on a drawing by Jean-Francois Baudin of the Tortochot flute. This would be an original flute then from about 1770. Interestingly, the characteristics of this flute as it comes out in its 3D printed form are much closer to the sound and the feeling of a baroque flute than of a French classical flute. And I think some of that has to do with the material that is used. It's quite an interesting material, which is 20% redwood wood fiber mixed with PLA 3D printing plastic. And it does have some resonant qualities. Sometimes I feel like instruments that are made of plastic or some derivative of plastic aren't really able to vibrate very well, but this actually does vibrate pretty well, and hopefully you can also hear that in the performance. Part of the wonderful thing about this flute and of Jeff's idea is that he really wants to make these available to anybody who is interested in experimenting with the baroque flute, and so they're going to be available, I believe, for $200, and that includes shipping within the US. You know, even if you have another baroque flute, one of these can be pretty handy because you can play on it all day long and it's not going to care, it's not going to crack. You can take it on your next backpacking trip with you. You know, various things that you wouldn't really consider doing with a fine wooden flute, you can do with this flute with no worries at all. The playing characteristics of this are quite good. One of the aspects of the design has been to make this really as close as possible to the original flute. There's always a temptation when doing a project like this to want to make the flute easier to play, and what happens in many cases is the embouchure gets a little bit larger, or it gets a little larger and a little more oval shaped, whereas the real embouchure hole is pretty much a round hole and it's pretty small. My own preference on baroque flutes is to play on the round, small hole. I believe very strongly that one can get the best sound out of that type of embouchure hole, even though it might take a little more work initially to learn how to utilize that hole. So especially for people who are coming from a modern flute, you know, you have to rethink the way you use the embouchure hole in order to play it well. But I think this is a very successful design. It, compared to the Tortochot originals, it is not as lively up in the third octave, which is maybe one of the things that makes it feel more like a baroque flute. So when you get up in F, F sharp, and G, it takes more effort. The notes are definitely there, but you have to work a little harder in the same way that you do on most baroque flutes. So for the demonstration, I decided to pick a couple of different things There are 4 movements by Louis Dequet de Hervalois, fantastic French composer who wrote mostly for the viola da gamba, and in fact these flute pieces were originally gamba pieces but were transcribed during the 18th century as flute pieces. So there's 2 of those, 2 movements, and then I do a Devienne adagio. So Devienne is something that would be very characteristic on a Tortochot flute, and then I finish up with 2 more movements of Coeur d'Hervalois. I've tried to have some variety in keys and use of different notes so you get an idea how everything works. The tuning is really quite amazingly good. It's about as easy to play in tune as any flute, seems to me. Jeff also has a very interesting design for the key. He's trying to keep things mechanically simple. And so the key, rather than using a spring, uses rubber bands. And for those of you who've played the baroque flute for a while, you know that sometimes we have rubber bands on our keys too. The rubber bands replace the spring mechanism that you would find on a normal baroque flute. Works actually quite well. You may notice in the photographs that this key has kind of a skinny design. That's something that is still being worked on, and the next iteration will have a more normal key shaped like the key from the original Tortochot flute. So I hope you enjoy this. We'll leave in the notes for this video information on how to contact Jeff and get one of these flutes for yourself. Thanks.